Under the thatched roof of the grandest compound in the village of Mbari, a girl moved like a whisper, her bare feet sliding silently across the polished clay floor. Her name was Adissa, and though her skin was dark and radiant like river-polished obsidian, though her eyes held the calm depth of a sky before rain, no one in the compound saw her. Or rather, they saw only what she did, the meals she cooked, the stains she scrubbed, the water she carried, but not the girl herself. Adissa was not born into this life of servitude. Once, she had laughed in sunlight beside her mother, playing beneath the wide arms of the baobab tree. But illness had taken her mother in the third moon of the drought. Her father, broken by grief, left her in the care of his new wife, a woman as proud as she was bitter, and vanished into the trade routes, never to return. Now Adissa belonged to the household of Lady Noria, her stepmother, and Zelima, her daughter, who was just a year older but lived like royalty while Adissa worked like a house goat. From the moment the sun cracked open the horizon, Adissa was up, sweeping ashes from the hearth, fetching water from the distant well, kneading yam paste for breakfast, and laying out fine silk wrappers for Zelima. She was made to kneel while scrubbing Zelima's feet, brush her hair while Zelima insulted her, and bow every time Lady Noria entered a room. "You missed a spot," Zelima would sneer, pointing to an invisible speck on the floor, her fingers always freshly painted and adorned with gold rings. "Do you want my feet to touch filth, bush rat?" Adissa would say nothing. She had learned early that silence protected her from worse. Instead, she would lower her head and scrub harder, pushing her pain into the rhythm of her hands, into the scent of soap and sweat. Zelima had an obsession with perfumes. Every few days, a new vial would arrive from traveling merchants, crushed petals of desert roses, oils from white lilies, and one that supposedly held the scent of fallen rain on hot stones. She demanded Adissa use them in her nightly bath, claiming they made her skin glow like royalty. The stepmother encouraged this vanity, always boasting to neighbors that her daughter's beauty could shame even the river goddesses. One late afternoon, as the air thickened with the coming of rain and market drums echoed through the distance, a stranger came to the compound. He was tall, wrapped in red robes with golden tassels, and his sandals crunched over the gravel like a serpent slithering across dry leaves. He carried a single small box wrapped in animal skin. Lady Noria received him in the inner courtyard. Adissa, though forbidden to speak, crouched nearby, arranging clay bowls and pretending not to listen. The merchant opened the box with a theatrical gesture, revealing a tiny golden vial, no bigger than a thumb, its surface etched with swirling patterns and symbols not of their land. The liquid inside shimmered, changing colors slightly with each shift of sunlight. "This," he said in a voice like wind through leaves, "is from the well of eternal fragrance. Found only in the mist-cloaked mountains of the north. Worn only by queens. It is not perfume, it is power." Zelima's eyes widened. "I want it." Lady Noria narrowed her gaze, suspicious. "How much?" "1 ivory tusk. Or something equal in sacred worth." Adissa expected her stepmother to scoff and wave him off. But Lady Noria surprised her. She vanished into the house and returned with a small wrapped bundle, her dead husband's last carved staff, once a family heirloom. She handed it to the merchant without blinking. He gave her the vial with a slight bow and vanished before the rain began. Later, in the candlelit bathhouse, Adissa stood by the large clay basin filled with steaming water. She was told not to even breathe near the vial. Zelima reclined in the water, naked, lazy, lifting her arms for Adissa to wash. "Don't use too much," she said with a smug smile. "It's not for creatures like you. You'd probably burn if it touched your dirty skin." Adissa said nothing, her fingers trembling slightly as she reached for the vial. She uncorked it slowly. A scent like nothing she'd ever known rose into the air, sweet, yes, but ancient, earthy, and sharp, like lightning caught in a bottle. She dabbed a few drops into the water, watching it swirl with golden ribbons. As she poured more over Zelima's shoulders, some of it trickled down her own hand. She froze. The liquid didn't sting exactly, but it tingled, as though alive. Like heat, or warning. Zelima, oblivious, tilted her head back and moaned with pleasure. "Rub it in, you useless thing." Adissa obeyed, but her mind was elsewhere. Her palm buzzed. Quietly, she turned her back to Zelma, lifting her hand into the dim lantern light. There, just below the curve of her thumb, a faint mark shimmered. A swirl, almost like one of the symbols on the golden vial. It pulsed once, then dimmed. She blinked. The mark was gone. Her heart thudded in her chest like a frightened bird. The bath ended. She dried Zelma, helped her dress in silk, and cleaned up in silence. When she went to rinse the cloth she had used, it smelled stronger than any scent she had ever known, not just floral, but something darker beneath it, something sharp that made her eyes water. That night, long after the household fell asleep, Adissa sat by the shuttered window in her small storeroom, her hand open under the moonlight. The mark was gone, but the tingling remained. She whispered to herself, as the wind outside rustled the trees, "What kind of perfume burns without fire?" And in the silence that followed, the night air carried a scent into the room. A scent that did not belong there. A scent that lingered, and watched. The days that followed the arrival of the golden perfume were strange, heavy, and uneasy, as though the very air in the compound had thickened with something unseen. At first, Zelma paraded through the house with more vanity than ever, walking slowly so her long braided hair could swing over her shoulder, tilting her chin so the scent would catch the breeze and draw attention. She spent hours admiring herself in polished brass mirrors, her voice constantly floating through the halls, "Look how I glow. This perfume is not for ordinary girls." She began calling herself Queen Zelma in front of the servants. She made Adissa kneel before her every morning, dabbing more of the shimmering liquid on her shoulders, chest, and wrists. Lady Noria, far from objecting, encouraged it, saying, "Let her embrace her status. This is what happens when royalty reveals itself." But something was changing, not just in behavior, but in Zelma's body. At first, it was subtle. Her voice grew sharper, her laugh brittle. Her skin, which once held a smooth bronze sheen, now flushed too easily. A constant redness spread across her shoulders and arms. She began scratching herself, blaming insects and dust. "You call this clean, Adissa?" she snapped one evening after bathing. "You scratched me. Scrubbing like a savage, look." She pointed to a red well blooming on her back like fire beneath the skin. It hadn't been there moments earlier. But Adissa said nothing, only bowed her head. "She's trying to ruin me," Zelma declared, turning to her mother. "She's jealous. Her ugly skin can't stand my glow." Lady Noria's eyes narrowed. "Ungrateful little leech," she said to Adissa. "You sleep where rats sleep, and still, you dare raise your hand to beauty?" Adissa tried to explain, softly, that she hadn't pressed hard at all, but the stepmother had already lifted her cane. It fell across Adissa's back with the fury of a storm. Then again. And again. That night, Adissa wasn't sent to her storeroom. She was locked in the smoke-room, an old, soot-darkened shed behind the kitchen where meat was once dried over hanging fires. Now it was only used for punishment. They lit a small pot of burning coals soaked with pepper seeds and closed the door. The air became choking. Her lungs burned. The glowing mark on her palm tingled again, as though warning her. She coughed and trembled through the night, eyes red and body limp by morning. No one in the house spoke of it the next day. Adissa simply returned to her chores, moving slower now, her ribs aching. But something else had begun to shift, beyond the walls of the compound. In the village, whispers were growing. "Have you smelled that girl, Zelma?" an old woman muttered to another at the well. "She walked by my stall and the scent clung to my clothes for hours." "Not just scent," said a hunter. "I saw her pass by the goats. They bolted like hyenas were chasing them." "She's cursed," said a child, hiding behind his mother's leg. Even the dogs in the compound, usually lazy and indifferent, began to avoid her. One growled as she walked past, teeth bared, ears flattened. Zelma noticed. Of course she did. But she didn't care. In fact, she leaned into it. "They hate me because they smell power," she told her mother. But Adissa, watching silently, saw something else. Zelma's skin was no longer just red, it had begun to crack in small lines along her shoulders and arms. She covered them with fine shawls, but Adissa saw them when she bathed her. And Zelma was using more of the perfume than ever, far more than the merchant had advised. That's when Adissa heard the tale. She had been sent to the market to fetch kola nuts and palm oil. As she waited for the seller to wrap the items in palm leaves, an old woman in tattered robes shuffled up beside her, leaning on a crooked staff carved with strange spiral patterns. "You smell like the cursed," the woman rasped. Adissa blinked. "I'm sorry. The scent clings to you. Just a trace. You've touched the vial, haven't you?" Adissa stiffened. The old woman narrowed her eyes, voice low and thick with warning. "That perfume, it is not from this land. It was stolen from the sacred grounds of the northern mountains. From the well of eternal fragrance. It does not bring beauty. It reveals the truth beneath flesh. And if worn with pride," her cracked lips curled, "it burns." Before Adissa could ask more, the woman turned and limped away, vanishing into the crowd like smoke. That night, a storm rolled over the village. Thunder cracked like split trees, and lightning lit up the thatched roofs in stuttering flashes. Zelma called for her bath, despite the downpour outside. Adissa prepared the water in silence. The vial was nearly half empty now. Zelma poured an unreasonable amount into the basin, the golden liquid spiraling like fire across the surface. "More," Zelma snapped. "Scrub harder. Make my skin shine." As Adissa obeyed, rubbing the perfumed water across her stepsister's arms, she saw it, the skin blistering under her hand. Just for a moment. A flash. Tiny bubbles formed under the skin. Then, gone. The skin smoothed over, as if nothing had happened. Adissa pulled her hands back quickly. But Zelma had felt it. "What was that?" she asked, blinking. "That tingled." Adissa said nothing. In her mind, the old woman's words echoed, "It reveals the truth beneath flesh." Zelma reached for the vial. "I want to use the rest tomorrow. I want to be glowing when the prince arrives for the festival." She walked away, trailing wet footprints across the floor, unaware of how they sizzled faintly as they dried. Adissa sat alone by the basin, watching the golden threads of perfume curl in the water like snakes preparing to strike. She whispered to herself, "It's not meant for her. It's meant to show who she really is." Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the perfume began to lose its scent, but not its power. The compound slept under the weight of the storm's memory, puddles clung to every stone, and the air was thick with the scent of wet earth and quiet grief. Long after the lanterns dimmed and the last servant snored, Adissa slipped out through the back gate. Her breath was shallow, chest still sore from the punishment days before, but her feet moved with purpose, as though drawn by something older than pain. Past the kitchen yard and the wall of wild palms, hidden behind a veil of thorny hibiscus and choking weeds, lay the garden. It had once been a place of song and light, where her mother grew herbs, vegetables, and flowers that hummingbirds used to dance over. It was sacred to her. Adissa could still remember the feel of warm soil between her fingers as a child, her mother's voice humming lullabies, the sunlight catching the beaded strands in her mother's hair. But since her death, no one came here. The garden had grown wild, its paths swallowed by roots, its herbs strangled by thorn creepers. Lady Noria had declared it a useless tangle of bush, unworthy of effort. Servants avoided it. Some claimed it was haunted. But to Adissa, it remained the only place in the world where she could breathe. She stepped over a fallen log, her dress catching on brambles. Her fingers brushed against dry lavender, long dead, and a line of mint that still stubbornly clung to life near the edge. In the center of the garden stood a cracked stone, her mother's grave, unmarked by name but wrapped once a year in dried blossoms. No one else remembered the date anymore. But Adissa always did. She knelt beside it, the wetness from the earth soaking into her knees. In her hand, she clutched the small washing rag she'd used on Zelma earlier, now stiff with dried perfume and tears. The faint, ghostly scent still clung to it, even though the cloth had been washed. It didn't smell like anything she could name anymore. It didn't even smell like flowers. It smelled alive. Dangerous. "I don't know what this is," she whispered, voice trembling. "But I know it's not meant for her." She looked at the stone, at the moss growing around its edges, and then at the rag. With slow, aching hands, she dug a small hole beside the grave and buried it, pressing the soil down gently, as though tucking in a child. "I miss you," she whispered. "And I'm scared." The wind stirred through the leaves, brushing against her cheek like a cold hand. The garden, though silent, felt aware, like it was listening. She stayed there for a long time, arms wrapped around herself, her breath slowing. Then she left, vanishing into the shadows before dawn's blue touched the sky. But the garden did not sleep. When the first light returned and dew clung to every blade of grass, something stirred beneath the soil. From the place where Odessa had buried the rag, a cluster of vines began to rise. Fast, unnatural, alive. They twined together, curling like fingers, and bloomed, not with flowers of any kind known to the land, but with translucent petals that shimmered gold and red in the rising sun. They pulsed faintly, like breath. And from their center rose a smell, faint at first, but unmistakable. The perfume. Only it was no longer sweet. It was sharp. Smoky. Like fire trying to disguise itself as honey. Later that night, Odessa returned. She hadn't planned to, something simply drew her. The garden greeted her with silence, but her eyes were drawn immediately to the strange bloom. She froze. The flowers were glowing softly. Around them, the grass had gone dry. Even the air was hot. She took a trembling step closer, and the perfume struck her senses hard. But this time, it didn't feel intoxicating. It felt angry. Odessa dropped to her knees, staring at the blossoms, at the tendrils that pulsed with light. And then, just as the wind stirred again, a voice rode upon it, not loud, not harsh, but unmistakable. It came not from above or below, but within. "Return what was stolen, and the fire will cool." Odessa gasped and stumbled backward. Her heart raced like a war drum in her chest. She looked down at her hands, the palms still tingled. Not visibly marked, but she could feel it. The warmth. The invitation. The threat. Was this a curse? Or something more? She looked at the glowing flower again. Suddenly, the garden no longer felt like a place of comfort, but a threshold. She had touched something ancient, something sacred. And now, it had touched her back. For the first time, Odessa didn't feel just frightened. She felt chosen. The morning sun rose heavy with promise and tension. The sky was cloudless, the air perfumed with dew and the anticipation of drums. It was the day of the royal festival, held once every 3 years, when girls from noble households were presented before the royal family. This year, the rumors whispered that the prince himself would be watching, and that he was ready to choose a future wife. A single gesture from him, even a look, could change a family's fate. And Zelima was ready. Lady Noria had prepared for weeks, bribing tailors to craft the most dazzling indigo wrapper, stealing silver beads from old dowries, and hoarding her daughter's best oils and perfumes for this day. But above all, it was the golden vial that sat on the shelf like a crown jewel. Only half full now, yet still glowing faintly, still pulsing with the power no one dared name aloud. "She will blind them with beauty," Lady Noria said proudly, holding Zelima's chin and tilting it in the light. "A star among stones. And you," she turned sharply to Odessa, "will make sure she shines. If you mess this up, I will personally grind your hands to dust." Odessa bowed in silence, her eyes unreadable. She was used to being invisible. But this morning, she felt like a thread pulled too tight, something in her chest throbbed, and the memory of the garden vines still haunted her. The wind had been whispering to her in fragments all night. She had dreamed of fire curling into flowers, of voices rising from wells, of perfume thick as smoke choking the skies. Still, she moved through her tasks with practiced calm. In the small bathing room, the steam rose from the clay tub. Zelma, bare and smug, lay reclined on a bed of cushions beside the water. "Do not bruise me," she snapped. "And use all the perfume today. The prince will remember the girl who smelled like heaven." Adissa nodded, uncorking the vial slowly. The scent hit her harder than ever, not sweet, not floral, but sharp and scorched, like petals dropped on coals. It made her eyes sting. She hesitated. Zelma noticed. "What are you waiting for, goat girl? Pour it in." Adissa tipped the vial, letting the last thick drops spiral into the water. The perfume shimmered like molten gold across the surface. As she reached for the cloth, the warmth touched her palm, and again, the tingling returned. The mark. It was back, glowing faintly beneath her skin. She knelt by the basin and began to wash Zelma's back, slowly. The scent rose like a veil around them, thick, oppressive. Then, the first scream. Zelma jolted upright, clutching at her shoulder. What is that?" "It's hot, it's burning me." Adissa staggered backward. Steam was rising not just from the water, but from Zelma's skin. Blisters swelled across her back like angry boils, red and raw. Her flesh crackled with the sound of fire licking wood. Zelma screamed again, a sound that cut through every wall in the compound. She collapsed to the floor, writhing, clawing at her skin. Smoke curled from her body, and the scent was no longer of perfume, but of scorched flesh and ash. Lady Noria burst into the room, slipping on the wet floor. "What's happening? What have you done?" Zelma could barely speak. She burned me. She ruined me." Adissa knelt frozen, the cloth still in her hands, soaked and smoking. Then, the golden vial rolled from the table and hit the floor with a sharp crack. Everyone watched. Instead of liquid, a fine trail of ashes spilled out, dancing like powder in the light. No fragrance. No shimmer. Just the end. Lady Noria's face twisted into something inhuman. "Witch," she screamed. "You cursed her. You ruined my daughter." "No," Adissa whispered. "It wasn't me. The perfume." But no one listened. She was seized by two of the compound guards, her arms yanked behind her, wrists bound with leather cords. Lady Noria screamed curses, Zelma howled in agony, and the household fell into a whirlwind of chaos. Outside, the royal carriage approached. Gold-plated, pulled by 4 ivory-colored horses, flanked by drummers and flag-bearers. The village children danced around it, the crowd parted, anticipation high. But when the carriage reached the compound and the prince's aides stepped forward, they were met with screaming, smoke, and the sight of Zelma being dragged inside, her body covered in burning welts. Her hair was wet, her skin peeling. The aides looked disgusted. One of them turned away. The carriage left without stopping. Lady Noria collapsed in the courtyard, sobbing and shrieking. "You've cursed us. You've shamed us all." Adissa was dragged across the yard, her knees scraping over gravel, tears burning in her eyes not from pain, but from something deeper. Something she couldn't name yet. They chained her to a post by the storeroom, hands behind her back, knees in the dust. The scent of smoke still clung to her, but her body was calm, quiet, as though she had known this moment was coming. By late afternoon, the compound fell silent again. Zelma was sedated with herbs. Lady Noria had sealed herself inside. The servants whispered, avoiding Adissa's gaze. But someone else had come. A robed figure walked slowly into the compound. His skin was the color of polished wood, his beard gray as ash, and his staff bore a symbol carved in swirling patterns, the same as the mark once glowing on Adissa's palm. He approached without fear, his eyes fixed on the girl in chains. He stopped in front of her and tilted her chin up gently. Then he looked at her hand. The mark was glowing again, faint, but unmistakable. The man's eyes narrowed with awe and certainty. "The scent," he said softly, "chose you." The sound of the village drum split the dawn open like a blade. One beat, heavy and slow. Then another. And another. It was the summons no one could ignore, a trial under the sacred Irako tree. Not for thieves, not for land disputes or petty curses, no. That drum called only for matters that whispered of gods, ancestors, and things too dangerous to be judged by human eyes alone. By midday, a crowd had gathered at the clearing where the great Irako tree stood, its ancient limbs stretching like fingers across the sky. The tree was said to be older than the village itself, its roots tangled with bones and stories. No bird ever landed on it. No axe had ever touched it. The villagers said it was the place where spirits sat and watched. Adissa stood in chains beneath it, guarded on either side by silent elders. Her wrists were raw, her face shadowed by sleeplessness, but her back was straight. There was nothing left in her to break. Not after the garden. Not after Zelma's screams. Around her, villagers murmured. She burned her stepsister. They say she used forest magic. I heard the prince turned away when he smelled the girl's flesh. I heard she touched a cursed perfume. I heard she was marked. The wind picked up, brushing dust across bare feet, as the priest stepped forward. He was the same one who had appeared in the compound, tall, wrapped in deep brown robes embroidered with gold thread. His eyes were sharp but kind, as though he had lived several lives and had forgotten none of them. In his hand, he held a staff carved with spirals and leaves. At his chest, a pendant of smooth stone pulsed faintly. He raised his hand, and the murmurs fell away. This child, he began, his voice resonating with something older than his throat, stands accused not of misdeed alone, but of awakening something ancient. We gather not to punish, but to understand. He turned to Adissa. Speak, he said simply. Tell them what happened. From the first day. Adissa lifted her chin. She could barely swallow from the dryness in her throat, but her voice did not shake. She told them everything. Of her life in the compound. Of the arrival of the perfume. Of how it tingled when it touched her skin. Of the strange glowing mark. Of Zelma's change, her arrogance, her obsession. Of the garden blooming unnaturally. Of the vines, the whispering wind. Of the moment Zelma's skin split open like roasted yam. Of the ash that poured from the shattered vial. And finally, of the priest who had come, seen the mark, and said, "The scent chose you." When she finished, the crowd remained quiet, not out of disbelief, but something closer to reverence. The priest nodded. Your words align with what has been hidden for generations. He stepped closer. Let us see what truth the tree remembers. He gestured toward the trunk of the Irako. Place your hand here, child. Let the mark speak. Adissa hesitated. Her feet moved slowly through the dust. As she reached the base of the tree, a hush fell over the clearing. She raised her right hand, palm open, and placed it flat against the rough bark. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the mark glowed. Not faintly. Not timidly. It pulsed, golden red, as if fire danced beneath her skin. The crowd gasped. Even the priest took a step back. Then the Irako groaned. Its bark rippled, shifting like the surface of disturbed water. The roots at its base curled inward, revealing a hollow space hidden deep within. Dust poured from the opening. And then, the smell. Not decay. Not earth. Perfume. The scent rolled from beneath the tree in waves, soft, haunting, and impossibly familiar. It wasn't sweet. It wasn't floral. It was the same scent that had haunted the compound, clung to Zelma, bloomed in the garden. But here, in this clearing, it felt pure. Undiluted. Untouched by vanity or greed. The priest approached the hollow slowly. Inside, a small stone well sat hidden beneath the roots, circular, rimmed in ancient carvings, its water still and clear. The well of eternal fragrance, he said, voice almost breaking. It lives beneath the roots of the Irako, as it has since before this village was carved from dust. He turned to the people. You have heard stories of it, old songs, half-remembered myths. But you forgot the truth. It was never a gift for beauty. Never a prize. The well gives not what you desire, but what you deserve. He looked at Lady Noria in the crowd, who stood pale and trembling. The merchant who sold you the perfume broke the pact. That vial was stolen, torn from this sacred place and sold like goat meat in a market. Murmurs surged again. But how could Adissa be marked? Someone asked. She's just a servant. The priest looked back at Adissa. Because her blood remembers. He placed a hand over his chest. There were once 7 guardians of the well, chosen by the elements, blessed to protect its power. They wore no crowns. They held no thrones. But the well sang through their lineage. One of them left a daughter. And that daughter bore a child. He turned to the crowd. Adissa is of that blood. The well recognized her. It spoke to her through the scent, through the mark, through the garden she tended in grief. That's why the perfume reacted to her. That's why it spared her and punished the other. Adissa's eyes widened. The world tilted under her feet. She had no words. Only a question in her heart, then who am I really? The priest's voice softened. You are not cursed, child. You are called. The wind rose again. The leaves of the Irako whispered overhead. And for the first time since her mother's death, Adissa felt like something lost had been returned to her, not by force, not by begging, but by something sacred. Something watching. Something waiting. The trial was no longer about punishment. It had become a reckoning. And the well was just beginning to remember. The wind howled as Adissa stood at the edge of the forest, the priest's words still ringing in her ears. Return what remains to the place it was stolen from, and you may undo what vanity has burned. Her hands trembled as she clutched the leather flask now filled with scorched rags and the ashes of the perfume. The shattered remnants of the golden vial had been carefully swept and sealed by the priest, who wrapped them in sacred cloth before placing them in her hands. You carry more than remains, child, he had whispered. You carry judgment. You carry mercy. The well knows the difference. The journey began before dawn, and with it came a silence she had never known. The path into the northern hills was said to be cursed. No birdsong, no footsteps from others, just the crunch of her soles on earth and the occasional cry of distant winds curling through dead branches. On the first night, she took shelter in a hollowed baobab tree, too afraid to light a fire. The night air was bitter. She lay with the flask clutched to her chest and dreamed of her mother, not in softness, but in warning. Her mother's voice echoed, the scent was never meant for the surface. Some things bloom only in darkness, Adissa. She awoke shivering, but stronger. She pressed forward. On the 3rd day, mist rose from the forest floor. That's when the whispering began. At first, she thought it was the wind again, but the sound had shape, it wrapped around her name. Adissa, chosen child, bearer of balance, the trees leaned as she passed, and strange vines parted before her bare feet. Once, she stepped near a bubbling stream, and the water curved away from her toes as though it knew her scent. Not of the perfume, but of something older. Birds, strange, feathered creatures with eyes that gleamed like wet stone, began following her from branch to branch. They never caught or sang. They simply watched. And when she stumbled on steep rocks, they circled overhead, guiding her path with subtle wing beats. In the 4th night, the ground opened under her in a shallow landslide, and she tumbled into a ravine. Her knee was bloodied, her palm scraped raw. She screamed into the silence, angry, at the curse, at the perfume, at a world where cruelty clothed itself in sweet smells and golden bottles. She struck the ground with her fist and shouted, I never wanted to carry this. A soft glow shimmered from the flask. The ashes inside seemed to pulse faintly. And then, a breeze that wasn't cold brushed her cheek, like a hand. Her mother's scent. The one she remembered from before she died. Earth, and smoke, and something like ginger. I see you, Adissa whispered through tears. I'll finish this. By dawn, she climbed out. On the 5th day, she reached the foot of the mist-covered mountain. It loomed high, ancient and alive, though no living thing stirred. As she ascended, the temperature dropped, but not unpleasantly. Her skin, once stung by the ashes, now felt warm from within. Then she saw them, stone-faced guardians. Statues, at first glance, towering over the pathway with arms crossed, eyes closed. But one of them, the smallest, opened its eyes. Adissa froze. Its eyes were hollow yet lit from within, like the first glow of coals in morning fire. "You are the first to return," it said in a voice like shifting stone. She bowed instinctively. "I was told to bring this back." She held up the flask, her hand steady now. The statue stepped aside, and the others, wordless, parted with it. A narrow trail wound into a crescent glade, and at its center, there it was. The well of eternal fragrance. It was not large. Not dramatic. Just a pool of water so still it looked like glass, framed by black stones and humming faintly, not with sound, but with memory. Adissa knelt before it. She opened the flask. The ashes shimmered softly, lifting in a swirl before settling again. She tipped the flask slowly, letting them pour into the well. The moment they touched the water, the well flashed gold, radiant, blinding, then instantly calmed. The mist parted. Silence fell. Then, a wave. Not wind. Not touch. A wave inside her. A warmth like sunrise unfurling in her chest, moving through her arms, her legs, up her spine. Her back arched. She gasped, not in pain, but release. The mark on her palm glowed one last time, then vanished. She lowered her hand. The water in the well was clear again. But the air had changed. It smelled of wet leaves, firewood, and jasmine, not perfume. Something honest. The statue reappeared beside her. It did not speak. Adissa looked up at it and said quietly, "Is it over?" The statue did not nod. It simply raised a stony hand and placed it lightly on her shoulder. In that single touch, Adissa felt her body understood. Not healed, but recognized. The well had taken what was owed. The curse was gone. The rest was hers to carry, or release. As she descended the mountain, the birds flew ahead, and the trees no longer whispered warnings, only songs. And far behind her, where ashes met sacred water, the well rippled once more, and sealed itself with vines. As if it had never been touched. But deep below, something remembered her name. Adissa. Bearer of balance. Daughter of those who kept the scent pure. Smoke lingered in the stepmother's compound long before Adissa's return. It wasn't from firewood or cooking pots, no hearth had been lit in days. The scent clung to every cloth, every wall, every corner of the compound like an invisible punishment. No matter how many pots of lemon water were boiled, no matter how hard the servants scrubbed the floors with crushed herbs and bitter root, the smell of ash remained. The stepmother could no longer sleep through the night. She would wake gagging, her tongue thick with soot she could not spit out. Even bathing didn't help, the more she washed, the more it reeked. And in her dreams, she heard the hiss of perfume bottles breaking, over and over. Zelima had stopped going outside. Her skin, once carefully oiled and glistening with gold powder, was now dry and fragile, cracked like riverbed clay under the sun. Every time she moved, her joints ached. Her once proud face had grown pale, not from fear, but from something deeper, as though her skin itself was rejecting her past. She sat inside the darkest room of the house, the one without mirrors. And still, the scent of burned perfume clung to her. "She's cursed us," the stepmother whispered one morning, her voice thin and brittle. "She didn't need to," murmured a servant. "You lit your own fire." By the time Adissa returned, the village sky had softened with evening gold. She came not on a cart, nor carried by guards. She walked. Alone. And yet, not quite alone. Children saw her first. Their games halted mid-skip, their pebbles left scattered in the dust as they stared. She wore no jewels, no rich cloth, but her presence shimmered like silk. Her hair, unbraided, flowed freely like smoke in wind. Her eyes, soft, calm, seemed to see everything and judge nothing. Word spread like a tide through the market. She's back. She lived. She carries no scent, but something about her feels clean. Like new rain. One by one, the villagers emerged. They didn't crowd her. They simply watched from doorways and behind clay pots. Their heads bowed slightly as she passed. Adissa walked straight to her old hut, the one behind the stepmother's house, where they'd made her sleep on mats meant for goats. It was still there, though half collapsed. She stood before it, eyes steady. Then she turned and walked toward the main house. Inside, the stepmother had been pacing for hours, wrapped in a veil soaked in palm wine and rosewater, desperate to cover the scent she alone could still smell. When a servant ran in, breathless, whispering, "She is here," the stepmother froze. Zelima, hiding behind a screen, clenched her brittle hands around her knees. The door creaked open. Adissa stepped inside. The light from the window fell upon her skin, and the stepmother gasped. There was no burn mark. No blemish. Only a gentle radiance, as though the sun had chosen to follow her. The scent that followed her and was not perfume, it was the memory of rain after long drought. The stepmother fell to her knees. Her voice cracked, not with pride but pleading. "I was wrong, we were all wrong, please forgive us, don't leave. Stay here. Let them come for Zelima. Take the gifts. Take the marriage. You have earned it now." Zelima remained silent. Her face was hidden, but Adissa felt her eyes behind the screen, hollow, unable to meet her gaze. Adissa said nothing. She looked around the house, the golden bowls, the silk cloths, the jars of oils and powders that had once been forbidden to her. All that effort, all that wealth, and yet the air was still thick with ash. Her gaze returned to the stepmother. In her silence, something heavier than any curse fell upon the room. Not rage. Not vengeance. Just truth. The stepmother sobbed harder. "I see it now. The scent was never perfume. It was you. You were the gift. And I," her hands trembled. "I burned it." Adissa turned slowly. She walked out, bare feet on stone, steady as thunderclouds. As she passed the gates, a fine caravan was just arriving, horses with golden reins, an envoy of royal colors. The prince had sent them again. But this time, they asked for no name. The leader stepped forward, saw her face, and bowed. The villagers gathered in silence. Her name, the youngest guard asked his superior. The captain only replied, "The one who rose from fire." Adissa paused at the village edge. Behind her, people waited to see what she would do, claim revenge? Send them groveling into the dust? She turned slightly, just enough to let her voice carry. "I was never the ashes." Then she stepped into the waiting carriage. And the scent she left behind was neither perfume nor smoke. It was memory, and it stung. The palace walls were not what Adissa had expected. They were not made of gold or the sharp, gleaming things that whispered of war and pride. No, they were built of cool stone and quiet corridors, places where the wind carried secrets and the morning light fell softly across garden beds yet to bloom. She had not come here to marry. And the prince, with quiet understanding in his eyes, did not ask her to. Instead, he led her through the palace grounds to a shaded area behind the royal compound. There, where the soil was dark and untouched, he turned to her and said, "Make something grow here. Something only you can create." Adissa stood still for a long time, hands folded around the pouch she had carried all this way. Within it were the seeds from her mother's resting place, seeds wrapped in the burned cloth she had once been cursed to wear. She knelt. Dug. Pressed. And from that moment, her garden began. Every morning, she walked among the rows barefoot, letting the dew cling to her ankles. Her fingers whispered to the roots as she planted ginger beside jasmine, and kola trees beside wild violet. She did not shape the garden by palace rules. She let it tangle. Let it decide. One day, she poured the final drops of the well water, clear, golden as honey, onto the center of the garden. The earth hummed softly beneath her. By dusk, a single white blossom had pushed through the soil. By morning, the garden had bloomed in ways no one could name. Flowers that had no known scent began to emit fragrances that changed with the person who entered. To one visitor, it smelled like a lost loved one's embrace. To another, it was the spice of home after a long journey. To children, it smelled like laughter and roasted groundnuts. Adissa did not explain it. She only smiled. She was not a queen. She wore no crown. But when the elders of the court needed counsel, not just for matters of war or rule, but for what could not be named, they came to her. And when the prince once addressed the court, he said this: "True beauty doesn't come from the bottle. Not from oils or powder. It comes from the ash you rise through, and how you choose to grow from it." The courtiers whispered of her garden. Of how it bloomed out of charred cloth and buried shame. They began calling her the keeper of scent, not because of perfume, but because of the way people left her presence carrying something invisible and unforgettable. Back in the village, Zelima was seen once. She passed through the market wrapped head to toe, her face hidden beneath thick veils, avoiding even the morning light. Children stared, unknowing. Some whispered she had become allergic to sun. Others said her skin had turned so pale that she feared mirrors. No one dared approach her. But Adissa never spoke her name again. She didn't need to. Instead, she told stories, mostly to children who gathered in the shade of her garden. They sat at her feet as she spoke, her voice calm as a night breeze. There was a perfume, she would begin, so fine that even spirits paused to breathe it in. But it was not found in bottles. You could not wear it. You could not steal it. You could only earn it, by walking through fire and refusing to burn bitter. She told them how some scents reveal truth. How no matter what clothes someone wears, the body remembers what it's been through. And sometimes, when you lean close enough, the skin will whisper its truth. She never named the curse. She never needed to mention cruelty. Instead, she ended every story with a simple line, spoken gently as if meant for only one heart at a time. The perfume never lied. It simply waited for the skin to speak its truth. And the children would breathe deeply then, some smiling, some looking at their own hands and wondering what their skin would one day say. Adissa's garden became a sacred space, not by decree, but by feeling. People came not to harvest, but to remember. To sit. To listen to the wind and what it carried. Some came in silence. Some brought grief. Some, like the prince, came often but asked nothing, only standing among the blooms, closing their eyes, letting the scent guide them. And on certain nights, when the moon was highest and the air still, people swore the garden itself whispered. Not with words, but with memory. And in that sacred hush, they knew. The fire did not consume her. It crowned her. Far from the palace, beyond hills where the wind ran dry and the soil cracked like old skin, a small wooden crate arrived in a nameless village. It was wrapped in worn cloth, no seal, no sender. Inside the home of an old woman, her hands veined like rivers, her eyes the color of storm clouds, the crate sat unopened on a reed mat for 3 days. She didn't rush. Time had taught her that some things wanted to be opened only when the air was right. On the 4th morning, with the sun low and red behind the crooked roofs, she opened it. Within the crate sat a single glass vial. Slim. Dusty. Its cork sealed with thread. When she pulled the cork free, the scent rose gently, like something once remembered. At first it was roses. Faint. Wild. Untamed, not the kind bought or tamed in gardens. But just beneath it, came smoke. Not the kind from firewood or food. The kind that remembered pain. She held the vial to her nose and closed her eyes. And in that second, her mind flashed with images not her own, a girl in rags, a well glowing gold, skin marked by flame, and a garden that bloomed with secrets. A small voice tugged her from the vision. "Grandmother," the child whispered, barefoot in the doorway. "Why do we never wear perfume here?" The old woman turned her face slowly. Her mouth was kind, but the memory still lingered in her eyes. Because once, she said softly, someone tried to bottle beauty. And it burned her skin off. The child's eyes widened. Did she die? The woman didn't answer immediately. She looked at the vial, then corked it once more. No, she said. She lived. That's what frightened them most. Far away, high atop the sacred mountain, the well that had once flashed gold was silent. Its stone edges were dark with age, wrapped in moss and vines. No footsteps disturbed the dust. No priest stood watch. And yet, as twilight kissed the rim of the world, the water bubbled. Just once. A ripple broke the surface. Then stillness. Silence returned, but it felt like the breath after a name is whispered, not yet answered. Back in the palace garden, Adissa walked slowly between the rows she had grown with her own hands. The sky above her bled orange and crimson, as if the heavens were telling their own story of fire and rebirth. The light painted her skin in warm golds. Her eyes glinted like hidden lakes. Her garden had changed again. Some blooms only opened at dusk now, black-petaled things that smelled like old songs. Others had begun to bloom in silence, no color, no scent, but when someone stepped near, they heard whispers of truth they hadn't yet spoken aloud. She reached the heart of the garden, the place where she had once poured the last of the well water. There, a single tree now grew. Not tall. Not grand. But strong. Its bark was deep brown, rough like cured leather, and its branches were bare, except for one bloom, blood red and closed tight. Adissa stood before it and exhaled. Not sadness. Not joy. Something deeper. Something called peace. She closed her eyes and let the wind play with her hair. It passed gently through the garden, lifting petals, stirring vines. And then came the scent. Not jasmine. Not sandalwood. Not rose or cinnamon or smoke. But truth. It had no name, yet it carried everything, a mother's laughter, a stepdaughter's scream, the scrape of bone on stone, the hush of a baby's last breath, and the rise of a woman who chose not to destroy, but to grow. The scent filled the garden. The guards at the palace gates paused. A scribe dropped his quill. A child looked up and said, "I smell something that feels like memory." Adissa smiled. She didn't need to speak. Her garden did that now. Her story, seated in ashen flame, bloomed every time someone remembered her silence instead of her scream. And somewhere, across the hills, across the years, across the mouths of old women and curious children, the tale would be told again. Of the perfume that burned. And the girl who bloomed anyway.